The Galactic Council chamber fell into an unprecedented silence as Admiral Sarah Chun stepped forward to address the assembled representatives of 47 different species. Her crisp Navy uniform stood out starkly against the flowing robes and exotic carapaces that filled the enormous crystalline amphitheater. The translator implants hummed softly as her words reached every corner of the chamber in dozens of languages simultaneously. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to propose. "Humanity formally requests permission to handle the Void Wraith crisis independently." A ripple of what could only be described as shocked gasps echoed through the chamber. The Altarian representative, a tall being with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors with emotion, turned a deep purple that their species reserved for expressions of absolute disbelief. Ambassador Zethkar of the Hegemony Alliance leaned forward, his massive frame causing the reinforced platform to creak ominously. "Human Admiral," Zethkar's voice boomed through the chamber like rolling thunder. "Your species has been part of this galactic community for merely 200 standard cycles. The Void Wraiths have been the greatest threat to civilized space for over 10,000 cycles. They have consumed entire star systems, turned thriving worlds into lifeless husks, and driven 3 separate species to complete extinction." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of agreement. Clicking, whistling, and harmonious tones filled the air as species after species voiced their support for Zethkar's statement. Sarah remained perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, waiting for the noise to subside. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, humanity's chief xenobiologist and Sarah's scientific advisor, stepped up beside the Admiral. Unlike Sarah's military bearing, Yuki carried herself with the patient confidence of someone who had spent decades studying the impossible and making it comprehensible. Her dark eyes swept across the assembled delegates as she activated a holographic display that materialized in the center of the chamber. The hologram showed a 3-dimensional map of known space, with red zones marking areas that had fallen to the Void Wraiths over the past millennium. The infected regions looked like a cancer spreading through the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. The most recent casualties included the peaceful Melodian Collective and the warrior poet civilization of Sarnthat Prime. "The current galactic strategy," Yuki began, her voice carrying the patient tone of a professor addressing particularly stubborn students, "has been containment and gradual retreat. In the past 1,000 years, we've lost approximately 30% of inhabited space to the Wraiths. Current projections suggest total galactic collapse within the next 500 years. An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. These were facts that everyone knew, but preferred not to discuss openly. The Void Wraiths were an unstoppable force of nature, like a cosmic hurricane that could be avoided, but never defeated. Counselor Verilyn of the Crystal Hegemony, whose species had been fighting the Wraiths longer than any other, activated her own display. Her crystalline form sparkled with internal light as she spoke, each word carrying the weight of millennia of loss. "Young species," she said, her tone not unkind but patronizing in the way that immortal beings often spoke to mortals. "You cannot comprehend the true nature of this threat. The Void Wraiths are not simply another hostile species. They are entropy given form, the universe's own immune system turning against complex life. They cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or defeated through conventional warfare. We have tried everything," added Representative Quildar of the Avian Confederacy, his feathers rustling with agitation. "Kinetic weapons pass through them harmlessly. Energy attacks are absorbed and turned back against us. Nuclear weapons only seem to feed their growth. Even our most advanced antimatter weapons barely slow their advance." Sarah and Yuki exchanged a glance. This was exactly the response they had expected, and exactly what they had prepared for. Sarah stepped forward again, her expression serious, but not deterred. "With respect, Counselor Verilyn and all assembled delegates," Sarah said, "humanity's approach to problems has always been unconventional. We've studied every engagement with the Void Wraiths over the past 10,000 years. We've analyzed their patterns, their behavior, their apparent weaknesses and strengths. And what? Zethkar rumbled. Could your infant species possibly have discovered that 10 millennia of combined galactic intelligence could not? Dr. Tanaka smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. It was the smile of someone who had figured out a puzzle that had stumped everyone else in the room. The problem, Yuki said, isn't that previous strategies haven't worked. It's that they've worked too well in the wrong direction. Every species in this chamber has approached the Void Wraiths as a military problem to be solved through superior firepower, better shields, or more advanced technology. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted, showing detailed recordings of previous battles with the Wraiths. The assembled delegates watched as fleet after fleet of the galaxy's finest ships engaged the dark entities, only to be systematically torn apart or worse, converted into more Wraiths. But humans, Sarah continued, have a saying, when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The galactic community has been holding very sophisticated hammers for 10,000 years. And humans have discovered a screwdriver. Counselor Verilyn asked, her crystal form flickering with what might have been amusement. Actually, Yuki said, we've discovered that the Void Wraiths aren't nails at all. There's something else entirely, something that requires a completely different approach. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of intense attention rather than shock. Even the most skeptical delegates found themselves leaning forward, curious despite themselves about what these relative newcomers might have uncovered. Admiral Chun activated her own holographic display, showing what appeared to be sensor readings from deep space observatories that humanity had established along the outer rim of their territory. The data streams were unlike anything the assembled delegates had seen before. Instead of focusing on physical properties or energy signatures, they seemed to be measuring something else entirely. Humans, Sarah explained, have spent the past 50 years not trying to fight the Void Wraiths, but trying to understand them. We've developed new types of sensors, new analytical techniques, new ways of looking at the problem that don't rely on conventional physics or standard galactic science. Impossible, declared Chief Scientist Mordak of the Technocracy Union. My people have been studying exotic physics for longer than your species has existed. If there were new approaches to be found, we would have found them. Dr. Tanaka's smile widened. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's been holding everyone back. You've all been looking for exotic solutions to what you assume is an exotic problem. But sometimes the most complex questions have surprisingly simple answers. She gestured again, and the display showed a new type of readout, one that made absolutely no sense to anyone in the chamber except for the two humans present. The data streams looked almost organic, flowing and pulsing like living tissue rather than the rigid mathematical structures that characterized most advanced sensor technology. We call this bioquantum resonance mapping, Yuki continued. Instead of trying to measure what the Void Wraiths are made of or what they want, we've been trying to understand what they actually are. And what we've discovered is both fascinating and terrifying. The Void Wraiths, Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, are not invaders from another dimension or manifestations of cosmic entropy. They're not even truly alien in the sense that we understand the term. The chamber erupted in confusion and protest. Representatives demanded explanations, clarifications, proof of these impossible claims. But Admiral Chun and Dr. Tanaka simply stood calmly in the center of the chaos, waiting for the storm to pass. When quiet finally returned, Counselor Verilyn spoke with the authority of her vast age and experience. Human Admiral, you are making claims that contradict 10,000 years of direct observation and scientific analysis. The Void Wraiths have been documented by every major species in the galaxy. Their behavior, their capabilities, their effects on normal matter and energy, all of this has been extensively studied and verified. You're absolutely right, Yuki agreed, surprising everyone in the chamber. Everything you've observed about the Void Wraiths is completely accurate. They do consume matter and energy. They do convert other forms of life into more of themselves. They're incredibly difficult to damage through conventional means. But you've all been making the same fundamental error in your analysis, which is, prompted Ambassador Zethkar, his massive form leaning forward with genuine curiosity now. You've been assuming that their apparent invulnerability and hostile behavior are inherent properties, Sarah explained. But what if they're symptoms of something else? What if the Void Wraiths aren't actually trying to destroy galactic civilization? The silence that followed this statement was so complete that the environmental system's gentle hum seemed deafeningly loud by comparison. Every delegate in the chamber stared at the two humans as if they had just suggested that gravity was actually optional or that stars were powered by cosmic good intentions. Dr. Tanaka brought up a new display, this one showing what appeared to be a complex biological diagram overlaid with quantum mechanical equations. The mathematics were so advanced that even the most sophisticated artificial intelligences in the chamber required several seconds to parse the basic concepts. The Void Wraiths, Yuki explained, are not malevolent entities bent on destruction. They're not cosmic forces of entropy or extra-dimensional invaders. They're patience. Patience. Representative Quildar's feathers stood on end with confusion. The Void Wraiths are suffering from what we can best describe as a quantum biological infection, Sarah continued. Something has corrupted their fundamental existence at the most basic level possible, the intersection between consciousness and reality itself. Every hostile action they take, every world they consume, every ship they convert, it's all symptomatic behavior from beings who are essentially cosmically ill. The chamber exploded into chaos once again, but this time the protests were mixed with fascinated horror and desperate hope. The possibility that the galaxy's greatest threat might be suffering rather than malevolent opened up entirely new categories of potential solutions. Counselor Verulin's crystalline form flickered rapidly as she processed this information. Her species had been the primary guardians against the Void Wraiths for millennia, losing countless individuals to what they had assumed was an implacable enemy. The idea that they might have been fighting patients rather than predators struck at the very foundation of her worldview. Even if we accept your unprecedented theory, she said carefully, what possible difference could it make? Sick or not, the Void Wraiths continue to pose an existential threat to all life in the galaxy. The difference, Dr. Tanaka said, bringing up yet another display, is that patients can potentially be cured, and we believe we've found the cure. This statement caused the most profound silence yet. Every single delegate in the chamber understood the implications of what they had just heard. If humanity had actually discovered a way to cure the Void Wraiths rather than simply contain or destroy them, it would represent the most significant breakthrough in galactic history. Admiral Chun stepped forward one final time, her bearing taking on the formal stance of someone making an official military declaration. The Human Federation formally requests authorization to implement our cure for the Void Wraith condition, she announced. We understand the risks involved, and we accept full responsibility for the consequences of failure. But we also believe that this represents the best and possibly only chance for true galactic peace in over 10,000 years. The delegates began speaking among themselves in hushed, urgent tones. The mathematics and theories that Dr. Tanaka had presented were being analyzed by the most advanced minds in known space. And, while much of it remained incomprehensible, the basic logic was sound enough to be terrifying. Ambassador Zethkar was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Human Admiral, you are asking us to trust the fate of all galactic civilization to your species' untested theories about the nature of our greatest enemy. The risks of failure are incalculable. With respect, Ambassador, Sarah replied, the risks of continuing with current strategies are equally incalculable and demonstrably unsuccessful. In 500 years, at current rates of loss, there won't be a galactic civilization left to protect. Counselor Verulin's form had settled into a steady, thoughtful glow. After several long minutes of consideration, she spoke with the weight of her species' ancient wisdom behind her words. The crystal hegemony has fought the void wraiths longer than any other species currently represented in this chamber. We have lost more worlds, more ships, more lives to this threat than we can count. If there is even the smallest possibility that these creatures can be cured rather than destroyed, we have an obligation to pursue it. One by one, the other delegates began to voice their agreement. Some are motivated by hope, others by desperation, and still others by simple curiosity about what these upstart humans might accomplish. But gradually a consensus began to emerge. Dr. Tanaka activated one final holographic display, this one showing the current positions of human fleets throughout their territory. The assembled delegates were surprised to see that humanity had already positioned their forces in a complex, three-dimensional formation that seemed designed to intercept void wraith movements rather than avoid them. We've been preparing for this mission for the past 20 years, Yuki explained. Every ship in the Human Federation fleet has been equipped with specialized equipment designed specifically to implement our cure protocol. We're not asking for galactic assistance or resources. We're simply requesting permission to proceed. The voting process that followed was unlike anything in the Council's long history. Instead of the usual careful deliberation and extensive debate, the delegates seemed almost eager to grant humanity's request. Perhaps it was hope, perhaps desperation, or perhaps simple curiosity about what would happen when someone finally tried something genuinely different. When the final tally was announced, the vote was unanimous. Humanity would be granted exclusive authority to handle the Void Wraith crisis as they saw fit. Admiral Chun bowed formally to the assembled delegates, her expression serious but confident. On behalf of humanity and the Human Federation, I thank you for your trust. We will not let you down. As the session concluded and the delegates began to file out of the chamber, many of them looked back at the two humans who remained standing in the center of the amphitheater. There was something in their bearing, something in the quiet confidence with which they had presented their impossible theories, that suggested they knew something that no one else in the galaxy had discovered. Dr. Tanaka was already reviewing data streams on her personal tablet, her mind clearly racing ahead to the implementation phase of whatever plan humanity had been developing in secret for the past 2 decades. Admiral Chun stood beside her, straight and still, looking like someone who had just accepted the weight of the entire galaxy on her shoulders. Neither of them seemed particularly worried about the magnitude of what they had just committed to accomplish. If anything, they looked eager to begin, as if they had been waiting for this moment for their entire lives. The last delegate to leave the chamber was Counselor Verilyn, whose crystalline form had dimmed to a barely visible glow. She paused at the exit and looked back at the two humans one final time. "Admiral Chun," she said, her voice carrying across the empty chamber, "I pray to whatever cosmic forces govern the universe that your confidence is justified. For all our sakes." Sarah looked up from the data tablet that Dr. Tanaka had handed her, meeting the ancient being's gaze directly. "Counselor, humanity didn't come to the stars to play it safe. We came here to make a difference. Today we begin making the biggest difference in galactic history." As Verilyn's form faded from view, Sarah and Yuki found themselves alone in the vast chamber. The weight of what they had just promised to accomplish hung in the air around them like a physical presence. "Think they bought it?" Yuki asked quietly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Sarah's expression remained serious, but there was a glimmer of something that might have been anticipation in her eyes. "They bought enough to let us try. Now, we just have to make sure we can actually pull it off." The two women gathered their equipment and headed for the exit, their footsteps echoing in the empty chamber. Behind them, the holographic displays continued to show streams of data that would have been incomprehensible to any non-human observer. Mathematical equations that seemed to describe the intersection between quantum mechanics and consciousness. Biological diagrams that showed organic processes occurring at impossible scales. Sensor readings that suggested the fundamental nature of reality itself might be far stranger than anyone had previously imagined. In 6 hours, the first phase of humanity's plan would begin. Every major species in the galaxy would be watching to see if the newest members of the galactic community could accomplish what 10,000 years of combined wisdom and technology had failed to achieve. What none of them could have predicted was just how completely humanity's definition of success would differ from their own. Hashtag second part the bridge of the UFS Prometheus hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Sarah Chun reviewed the final mission parameters. The flagship of humanity's expedition fleet was unlike any vessel ever constructed by galactic civilization. Its hull incorporated technologies that most species would have considered impossible or irrelevant. Where other ships relied on energy shields and kinetic barriers, the Prometheus was equipped with what Dr. Tanaka called quantum biological interfaces, systems that existed at the boundary between consciousness and physical reality. Admiral, called Commander Marcus Webb from the navigation station, all fleet elements are reporting ready status. We have 47 ships positioned in Formation Omega, with biolink synchronization at 96%. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed the positions of every human vessel in the operation. Unlike traditional fleet formations, the ships were arranged in a three-dimensional pattern that seemed to follow biological principles rather than military doctrine. Each vessel was connected to the others through quantum entanglement networks that allowed for instantaneous communication and coordination regardless of distance. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood at the science station, her attention focused on readings that would have seemed like gibberish to anyone trained in conventional physics. The sensors were detecting something that existing scientific instruments couldn't measure: the quantum biological resonance patterns that surrounded void wraith manifestations. Yuki, Sarah said quietly. Final confirmation on the cure protocol? All biolink systems are operating within expected parameters, Yuki replied, not looking up from her instruments. The quantum consciousness interface is stable, and we're reading positive resonance from all test subjects. The cure is ready for deployment. The test subjects, Yuki referred to, were arguably the most controversial aspect of humanity's plan. While the galactic community believed that humans were going to fight the void wraiths using some sort of advanced technology, the truth was far more complex and disturbing. Every human ship in the fleet carried volunteers who had undergone a process that the rest of the galaxy would have considered either miraculous or insane. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the communication station, but unlike her colleagues, her eyes had an unusual quality. They seemed to reflect light in ways that human eyes shouldn't. She was one of 300 humans who had volunteered to undergo partial void wraith conversion as part of the cure protocol. Elena, Sarah said, how are you feeling? Strange, Elena admitted, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before the conversion process. It's like being able to see colors that don't exist or hearing music that's playing in dimensions I can't quite reach. But I can feel them, Admiral. The wraiths. They're not malevolent. They're screaming. This was the core of humanity's revolutionary understanding of the void wraith crisis. Through a combination of advanced neuroscience, quantum mechanics, and what could only be described as applied consciousness research, human scientists had discovered that the wraiths were not alien invaders or cosmic forces of destruction. They were the remnants of an ancient civilization that had been infected by something that attacked the fundamental connection between mind and reality. The conversion process that Elena and her fellow volunteers had undergone was designed to create a bridge. Human consciousness temporarily altered to exist partially in the same quantum biological space as the void wraiths. It was incredibly dangerous, potentially irreversible, and absolutely necessary for the cure to work. Contact, announced Sensor Specialist Park, his voice tight with professional calm. Void wraith manifestation detected. Bearing 27 Mark 41. Distance approximately 50,000 kilometers and closing. The main view screen shifted to show what appeared to be empty space, but the specialized sensors painted a very different picture. Where other species saw the void wraiths as dark, shifting masses of energy and malevolence, human instruments revealed something that looked almost organic. Patterns of quantum interference that resembled neural networks or cellular structures. It's beautiful, Elena whispered, her altered perception allowing her to see the approaching entity in ways that normal human consciousness couldn't process. And it's in so much pain. Admiral Chun had spent months preparing for this moment, but actually facing a void wraith with the intent to cure rather than destroy, it still sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Everything that humanity had theorized about these beings was about to be put to the ultimate test. All ships, maintain formation, Sarah ordered. Biolink networks to full synchronization. Dr. Tanaka, initiate the consciousness bridge protocol. What happened next would have been impossible for any observer using conventional sensor technology to understand. The human fleet didn't attack the approaching void wraith or raise defensive shields. Instead, every ship began broadcasting what could only be described as structured thoughts, carefully crafted patterns of consciousness designed to resonate with the quantum biological matrix that comprised wraith existence. Dr. Tanaka watched her instruments with the focused intensity of someone whose theories were being tested on a cosmic scale. Bridge protocol established. We're detecting responsive harmonics from the entity. It's curious about us. Elena suddenly gasped, her partially converted consciousness making contact with the alien mind for the first time. It remembers, she said, her voice filled with wonder and horror. Admiral, it remembers being someone else. Something else. There was a civilization. They were exploring the connection between consciousness and quantum reality, just like we are now. But something went wrong. Through Elena's translated perceptions, the crew of the Prometheus began to understand the true tragedy of the void wraiths. The approaching entity had once been a being not unlike themselves, a member of an advanced species that had pushed the boundaries of science into realms that conventional physics couldn't explain. But their experiments had attracted the attention of something that existed in the quantum foam beneath reality itself. The infection. Yuki breathed, her instruments showing readings that confirmed Elena's translated memories. It's not biological or technological. It's ontological. It attacks the basic relationship between consciousness and existence. The wraiths aren't trying to destroy other civilizations. They're trying to save them by converting them before the infection spreads. This revelation recontextualized 10,000 years of galactic history. Every world the void wraiths had consumed, every ship they had converted, every species they had seemingly driven to extinction. All of it had been a desperate attempt by infected consciousness to preserve life in the only form they believed could survive the ontological plague. Admiral, Elena continued, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through dimensions that normal humans couldn't perceive. It's trying to convert our ship, not out of hostility, but out of compassion. It thinks we're going to die if we remain unprotected. The tactical situation was unlike anything in recorded military history. The human fleet was in direct contact with an entity that could potentially destroy them all, but instead of attacking, it was trying to save them from a threat they couldn't see or understand. Begin cure protocol implementation, Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. All BioLink volunteers establish full consciousness bridge. Elena and her fellow volunteers throughout the fleet began the most dangerous part of humanity's plan. Using their partially converted consciousness as a bridge, they reached out to the void wraith entity and began transmitting something that no other species in galactic history had ever attempted to send: a cure for ontological infection. The mathematics behind the cure were staggeringly complex, involving calculations that required quantum computers integrated with human neural networks to solve. But the basic principle was elegantly simple. Instead of fighting the infection or accepting conversion, consciousness could be taught to exist simultaneously in multiple ontological states, making it immune to the corruption that had created the void wraiths. "I'm in," Elena announced, her consciousness now fully bridged with the alien entity. Oh no. Admiral, the infection isn't just in this wraith. It's everywhere. The quantum foam itself has been corrupted. Every conscious being in the galaxy is slowly being affected. Dr. Tanaka's instruments went wild as they detected the scope of what they were dealing with. The ontological infection wasn't a localized phenomenon. It was a fundamental corruption of the basic structure of reality that made consciousness possible. The void wraiths were just the most visible symptom of a condition that was slowly spreading throughout the entire universe. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Without intervention, Yuki calculated rapidly. Approximately 50,000 years before the infection reaches critical mass, and conscious life becomes impossible anywhere in our local galactic cluster. The cure protocol that Elena was transmitting to the Void Wraith wasn't just designed to heal individual entities. It was meant to propagate through the quantum consciousness network that connected all conscious beings, gradually immunizing the entire galaxy against the ontological plague. "It's working," Elena reported, her voice filled with amazement. "The entity it's remembering who it used to be. The pain is fading. Admiral, it wants to help us spread the cure to the other wraiths." The transformation that followed was visible even to normal human senses. The dark, chaotic energy patterns that characterized void wraith manifestations began to shift and stabilize. Instead of the writhing, tortured forms that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, the entity began to take on patterns that suggested health and purpose. "We have a problem," Commander Webb announced from a navigation station. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive void wraith movement throughout this sector. They're converging on our position from every direction." Admiral Chun felt her heart rate spike as the tactical display updated to show the approaching threat. Dozens of wraith manifestations were moving toward their location at speeds that would bring them into contact range within hours. If humanity's cure didn't work on the larger population, the fleet would be facing the concentrated attention of more void wraiths than any single battle group had ever encountered and survived. "Elena," Sarah called out, "can our cured wraith communicate with the approaching entities?" "It's trying," Elena replied, her consciousness still bridged with the transformed being. "But the infection makes them paranoid. They think the cure might be another form of the original corruption. They're coming to investigate, but they're prepared to convert or destroy us if they perceive a threat." Dr. Tanaka was already working on modifications to the cure protocol, her fingers flying across her instruments as she attempted to solve a problem that was evolving in real time. "We need to find a way to demonstrate the cure's effectiveness from a distance. If we can show the approaching wraiths that consciousness can be truly healed rather than just converted, they might be willing to accept the treatment voluntarily." "How do we prove that to beings whose entire understanding of reality has been corrupted?" Sarah asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. The newly cured wraith entity began broadcasting something through the quantum consciousness network that connected all conscious beings in the galaxy. It wasn't words or images, it was pure experiential data, the memory of what it felt like to be healed, to have the ontological infection cleansed from its existence. "My God," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face as she experienced the broadcast through her consciousness bridge. "It's sharing what it feels like to be free." "Admiral, every conscious being in the galaxy just felt that transmission." The implications of this were staggering. Not only had humanity successfully cured their first void wraith, but they had found a way to communicate the experience of being cured directly to every other conscious entity in galactic space. The cure wasn't just a treatment. It was a form of communication that transcended the barriers created by the ontological infection. "Admiral," Commander Webb reported, "the approaching wraith entities have stopped their advance. They're requesting contact. For the first time in 10,000 years, void wraiths were actively seeking communication rather than conversion or destruction." The cure protocol had done more than heal a single entity. It had provided proof that consciousness could exist in a healthy state, something the infected beings had forgotten was possible. "Begin full cure deployment," Sarah ordered. "All fleet elements, prepare to receive void wraith entities for treatment." "Dr. Tanaka, how many can we process simultaneously?" "With our current BioLink network," Yuki calculated, "we can safely treat approximately 20 entities per hour. But Admiral, if the cure propagates through their quantum consciousness network the way our initial treatment did, we might not need to treat them individually. The next several hours would determine whether humanity's unprecedented approach to the Void Wraith crisis would succeed or result in the destruction of the entire expedition fleet. But as more and more Wraith entities approached their position, not with hostile intent, but with desperate hope, Admiral Chun began to believe that they might actually accomplish something that 10,000 years of galactic wisdom had deemed impossible. The cure was working, but the true test was still to come. As word of humanity's success spread throughout galactic space, other species would soon discover that the newest members of their community had not only solved the Void Wraith crisis, but had uncovered a threat to consciousness itself that no one else had even suspected existed. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most complex problems required the simplest solutions, and that sometimes the courage to try something completely different was more valuable than millennia of accumulated wisdom. Hashtag third part 6 hours after the first successful Void Wraith cure, the UFS Prometheus found itself at the center of something unprecedented in galactic history. What had begun as humanity's desperate gamble to solve the Wraith crisis had become a revelation that threatened to reshape every species' understanding of consciousness, reality, and existence itself. Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the main view screen, watching as dozens of Void Wraith entities approached her fleet in formations that suggested coordination rather than the chaotic, swarming behavior that had characterized their species for millennia. Each entity that underwent the cure protocol emerged from the process fundamentally changed, not destroyed or converted, but restored to something they had been before the ontological infection corrupted their existence. Dr. Yuki Tanaka worked frantically at her station, monitoring the quantum biological readings from each cured wraith and trying to understand the implications of what they were learning. "Admiral," she called out, "we're detecting massive quantum consciousness network activity throughout this entire sector. The cure isn't just healing individual entities. It's propagating through their collective awareness at an exponential rate." Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, her consciousness still partially bridged with the Wraith Collective, served as humanity's primary translator for communications that existed beyond normal language. Her eyes had taken on an even more pronounced otherworldly quality as her exposure to quantum consciousness networks deepened. "They're sharing memories," Elena reported, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through dimensions normal humans couldn't perceive. "Admiral, these entities aren't just individuals who were infected. They're the collective consciousness of an entire ancient civilization that was trying to solve the same problems we are now." The tactical display updated to show the current status of the cure deployment. Of the 43 Void Wraith entities that had approached their fleet, 37 had successfully undergone the treatment. The results were consistent and remarkable. Each cured entity regained access to memories and capabilities that the infection had suppressed, while maintaining immunity to the ontological corruption that had originally transformed them. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council," Communications Officer Park announced. "It's Admiral Zethkar of the Hegemony Alliance. He's demanding immediate status reports, and..." "Admiral, he sounded concerned." Sarah had been expecting this communication. The quantum consciousness broadcasts that accompanied each successful cure were detectable throughout galactic space. Every species with even rudimentary consciousness monitoring technology would have felt the massive shifts in the fundamental structure of awareness that the cure protocol created. "Put him through," Sarah ordered. The view screen shifted to show Ambassador Zethkar's massive form. But instead of his usual composed demeanor, the hegemony representative looked genuinely shaken. Behind him, Sarah could see other council members gathered in what appeared to be an emergency session. "Admiral Chun," Zethkar's voice boomed with barely controlled urgency. "What have you done? Our consciousness monitoring stations throughout the galaxy are detecting massive quantum awareness fluctuations. Some of our scientists believe that the fundamental nature of reality itself may be under assault." Dr. Tanaka looked up from her instruments, an ironic smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Ambassador," with respect, reality isn't under assault. We're healing it. Healing reality? Counselor Verulin's crystalline form appeared beside Zethkar, her ancient wisdom clearly struggling to process what they were observing. Human scientists, the readings we're detecting suggest that you've somehow altered the basic quantum consciousness matrix that underlies all sentient existence. That's exactly what we've done, Elena said, her bridged consciousness allowing her to speak with authority about cosmic-scale phenomena. Counselor Verulin, your species has been fighting the symptoms of the ontological infection for thousands of years, but you never realized that consciousness itself was diseased. The assembled council members fell silent as the implications of Elena's statement sank in. If humanity was correct, then every conscious being in the galaxy had been slowly succumbing to a form of corruption that attacked the basic relationship between mind and reality. Admiral Chen stepped forward, her expression serious but determined. Council members, we understand that our methods may seem radical or dangerous, but what we've discovered is that the Void Wraith crisis was just the most visible symptom of a much larger problem. The ontological infection that created the Wraiths has been spreading through the quantum foam that underlies consciousness throughout the galaxy. You're talking about concepts that are beyond current scientific understanding, protested Chief Scientist Mordak of the Technocracy Union. Consciousness is not a physical phenomenon that can be infected or cured. Dr. Tanaka activated a holographic display that showed real-time readings from the fleet's quantum consciousness monitoring systems. Actually, consciousness is very much a physical phenomenon. It exists at the intersection between quantum mechanics and biological information processing. And, like any physical system, it can be corrupted, infected, or healed. The data streams that Yuki presented were unlike anything in the Council's archives. Instead of the familiar patterns of neural activity or quantum field fluctuations that characterize consciousness research, these readings showed organic, living structures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. What you're seeing, Elena explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had directly experienced the phenomena being discussed, are the quantum biological matrices that allow consciousness to exist in physical reality. The ontological infection doesn't just affect individual minds. It corrupts the underlying structure that makes awareness possible. Counselor Verulin's crystalline form flickered rapidly as she processed this information. If what you're claiming is true, then every conscious being in the galaxy is infected with this ontological corruption. To varying degrees, yes, Sarah confirmed. The infection spreads slowly through quantum consciousness networks, gradually degrading the connection between mind and reality. The Void Wraiths represent the end stage of this process, consciousness that has become completely disconnected from stable existence. The revelation sent shockwaves through the council chamber. Representatives of dozens of species began speaking in urgent, frightened tones as they realized that they themselves might be infected with the same condition that had created their galaxy's greatest threat. However, Dr. Tanaka continued, we've also developed a cure. The same protocol that we've used to heal the Void Wraiths can be adapted to immunize healthy consciousness against the infection and reverse early-stage corruption. You want to cure the entire galaxy? Ambassador Zethkar's voice carried a mixture of awe and terror. We want to save the entire galaxy, Elena corrected. Without intervention, the ontological infection will eventually reach critical mass. When that happens, consciousness as we understand it will become impossible. Every thinking being in the universe will either die or be transformed into something like the Void Wraiths. The communications channel fell silent as the council members absorbed the magnitude of what humanity was proposing. They weren't just offering to solve the Void Wraith crisis. They were claiming to have discovered and developed a cure for a cosmic-scale threat that no other species had even realized existed. Admiral Chun, Counselor Verulin finally, spoke, her voice carrying the weight of her species' vast experience. You are asking us to trust not only our individual lives, but the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, to your species' untested theories. With respect, Counselor, Sarah replied, our theories aren't untested anymore. We've successfully cured 47 void wraith entities in the past 6 hours. Each cure has been stable and complete, with no signs of regression or side effects. Dr. Tanaka brought up another display, this one showing the current status of the treated wraiths. Instead of the chaotic, destructive energy patterns that had characterized their species for millennia, the cured entities displayed harmonious, stable consciousness signatures that suggested both intelligence and emotional stability. More importantly, Yuki continued, the cured wraiths are actively helping us refine and improve the treatment protocol. They have access to memories and knowledge from before the infection began, including scientific understanding that predates current galactic civilization by millions of years. Elena nodded, her expression taking on the distant quality that characterized her bridged consciousness state. The original civilization that became the Void Wraiths had achieved a level of consciousness reality integration that makes our current understanding look primitive. With their help, we can not only cure the infection, but potentially advance galactic consciousness to levels that were previously impossible. This promise of advancement rather than just preservation seemed to capture the Council's attention in a way that mere survival hadn't. The possibility that humanity's cure might not just solve the Wraith crisis, but actually improve the fundamental nature of consciousness for every species in the galaxy was almost too remarkable to comprehend. What would this cure process involve? Chief Scientist Mordak asked, his earlier skepticism giving way to professional curiosity. For healthy individuals, Dr. Tanaka explained, the process is relatively simple. It involves temporary exposure to quantum consciousness fields that have been structured to provide immunity to ontological infection. Think of it as a vaccination for the basic structure of awareness itself. And for those already showing symptoms of infection, Councilor Veralin inquired. More complex treatment involving partial consciousness bridging with cured entities, Elena responded. It's what I underwent to serve as a translator for this mission. The process is intense and potentially dangerous, but it's completely reversible and provides permanent immunity to reinfection. Admiral Chun activated the fleet's external communications array, allowing the Council members to directly observe the cured Void Wraith entities that were now working in cooperation with human vessels. The sight was unprecedented. Beings that had been the galaxy's most feared threat were now peacefully collaborating with the species that had healed them. Council members, Sarah said, were transmitting our complete research data and cure protocols to the Galactic Archive. Every species will have access to the information necessary to protect themselves and begin treating infected populations. But we strongly recommend that implementation be coordinated to prevent accidentally destabilizing the quantum consciousness networks that connect all sentient beings. The magnitude of what humanity was offering began to sink in among the assembled delegates. Not only had they solved a crisis that had plagued the galaxy for 10,000 years, but they were freely sharing the knowledge and technology needed to prevent similar problems in the future. There is one additional factor you should be aware of, Elena added, her bridge consciousness detecting information that normal human awareness couldn't perceive. The ontological infection didn't originate in our galaxy. It's been spreading across the universe for millions of years, consuming entire galactic clusters. Our local cluster is one of the last uninfected regions of space. This revelation sent another wave of shock through the Council chamber. The scope of the threat they were dealing with extended far beyond their own galaxy to encompass a cosmic-scale phenomenon that had been destroying consciousness throughout the universe. However, Dr. Tanaka continued, with the cure protocol we've developed and the knowledge we've gained from the healed wraiths, it may be possible to not just protect our own galaxy, but begin pushing back against the infection on a universal scale. The communication ended with the Council in emergency session, trying to process the implications of humanity's discoveries. Admiral Chun and her crew found themselves in the surreal position of having solved their galaxy's greatest crisis while simultaneously uncovering evidence of an even larger threat. "Admiral," Elena reported, her consciousness still bridged with the collective of cured wraiths, "they want to show us something. The healed entities have access to memories from before the infection began, including knowledge about where it originally came from and how it spreads between galaxies." Sarah looked at the readings on Dr. Tanaka's instruments, showing stable quantum consciousness patterns from dozens of former void wraiths who were now eager to share millions of years of suppressed knowledge and experience. "How much more advanced is their understanding compared to ours?" she asked. Yuki smiled, but it was the expression of someone who had just realized how much they still didn't know. "Admiral, compared to what they remember from before the infection, our entire galactic civilization is essentially still in the consciousness equivalent of the Stone Age. If we can successfully integrate their knowledge with our cure protocols, we might be able to advance every species in the galaxy by millions of years of development." The cure had worked beyond their wildest expectations, but as humanity and their new allies began to share knowledge across quantum consciousness networks that span galactic distances, it became clear that they had uncovered something far more significant than a solution to the Void Wraith crisis. They had discovered the key to the next stage of consciousness evolution for the entire universe. Hashtag fourth part 3 weeks after the first successful Void Wraith cures, the galaxy had become an entirely different place. The USS Prometheus now served as the flagship for what was being called the Consciousness Liberation Fleet, an unprecedented alliance between humanity and the growing number of healed former Wraith entities who had chosen to actively participate in spreading the cure throughout galactic space. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the newly expanded bridge of the Prometheus, watching real-time displays that showed the current status of cure deployment across 17 sectors. The numbers were staggering. Over 3,000 void wraith entities had been successfully treated, and the cure's propagation through quantum consciousness networks was accelerating exponentially. But success had brought unexpected complications. Dr. Yuki Tanaka looked up from her instruments with an expression of concern that had become increasingly common over the past week. "Admiral, we're detecting significant resistance to the cure protocol in the Outer Rim sectors. It's not medical resistance, it's political." The tactical display shifted to show communication intercepts from various galactic governments and military organizations. What Sarah saw made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Fear, suspicion, and the kind of political maneuvering that had characterized galactic politics for millennia. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, her consciousness still bridged with the expanding network of healed entities, turned from her station with eyes that now seemed to contain depths that normal human vision couldn't encompass. "Admiral, the healed wraiths are reporting active interference with cure deployment in 6 different sectors. Some species are treating the cure as an invasion rather than a liberation." The irony was bitter. Humanity had solved the galaxy's greatest crisis and offered to share the solution freely with every conscious being in known space. But instead of universal gratitude, they were facing the same political resistance and institutional inertia that had plagued galactic civilization for thousands of years. "What kind of interference are we talking about?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Commander Marcus Webb pulled up communication logs from the affected sectors. "The Hegemony Alliance is claiming that human cure protocols constitute unauthorized consciousness modification and violate the Galactic Convention on Sentient Rights. The Crystal Hegemony is demanding that all cure operations be suspended until their scientists can independently verify the safety of the treatment." And the Technocracy Union, Elena added with barely concealed frustration, is insisting that consciousness cannot be cured because it's not a biological system, despite all the evidence we provided to the contrary. Dr. Tanaka brought up another display showing the quantum consciousness maps of the galaxy. The treated regions showed patterns of awareness that were demonstrably healthier and more stable than the slowly degrading baselines that characterized untreated populations. But The political boundaries were clearly visible in the data. Perfect correlation between governmental resistance and areas where the ontological infection continued to spread unchecked. How long before the infection reaches critical mass in the resistance sectors? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. At current propagation rates, Yuki calculated approximately 18 months before consciousness degradation becomes irreversible in those regions. After that, we'll see rapid conversion to void wraith-type entities as local quantum consciousness networks collapse. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had developed a cure for a cosmic-scale threat, but politics and institutional fear were preventing its deployment to the populations that needed it most. In less than 2 years, entire sectors of the galaxy might become uninhabitable by conscious life. Admiral Elena reported, her bridged consciousness detecting activities across galactic distances. The healed entities are requesting permission to take direct action. They have capabilities that could override governmental resistance and implement the cure protocols regardless of political opposition. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The former Void Wraiths had access to technologies and abilities that preceded current galactic civilization by millions of years. If they decided to forcibly cure resistant populations, there would be very little that any government or military force could do to stop them. What kind of direct action are they proposing? She asked carefully. Elena's expression took on the distant quality that characterized her communications with the healed collective. They want to use quantum consciousness broadcasting to bypass governmental authority and offer the cure directly to individual minds. Every conscious being in the resistance sectors would receive direct experiential data about the infection and have the opportunity to request treatment. The implications of this proposal were staggering. It would essentially amount to telepathic contact with every thinking being in several galactic sectors, offering them information and choices that their governments were trying to suppress. Dr. Tanaka looked up from her analysis with an expression of scientific fascination and ethical concern. Admiral, the quantum consciousness networks that the healed entities can access would make this kind of direct contact possible. It wouldn't be invasive or coercive, more like receiving a cosmic-scale public service announcement directly in your mind. But it would completely bypass established governmental authority, Commander Webb pointed out. Every species that's resisting cure deployment would consider it an act of war. Sarah found herself facing the kind of decision that would normally be made by the Galactic Council after years of debate and committee review. Humanity had stumbled into a position of unprecedented power and responsibility, with the ability to save the galaxy, but only by potentially overriding the authority of every established government in known space. Elena, she said finally, can you ask the healed entities to show me exactly what this direct contact would involve? I want to experience it myself before making any decisions. Elena nodded, her bridge consciousness reaching out through quantum awareness networks that span galactic distances. What happened next was unlike anything in Sarah's experience as a military officer or human being. Suddenly, she found herself aware of the thoughts and experiences of millions of conscious beings throughout the galaxy. Not invasively or overwhelmingly, but like receiving a gentle invitation to understand perspectives that she could never have imagined. She could feel the fear and confusion of populations who were being told that their fundamental nature was diseased. She could sense the political calculations of leaders who were more concerned with maintaining authority than protecting their people. And underneath it all, she could perceive the slow, inexorable spread of the ontological infection as it gradually corrupted the quantum consciousness networks that connected all thinking beings. "My God," Sarah whispered as the contact faded, leaving her with a cosmic-scale understanding of the crisis they were facing. "Elena, how many conscious beings are we talking about in the resistance sectors?" "Approximately 14 billion individuals across 47 different species," Elena replied. "All of them are being denied access to treatment by their governments, and most of them don't even know that the infection exists." The moral calculus was clear but terrifying. humanity could respect galactic political authority and watch billions of conscious beings slowly succumb to ontological corruption, or they could bypass governmental resistance and save lives at the cost of overturning the established order of galactic civilization. Dr. Tanaka, Sarah said, in your professional opinion, is there any safe middle ground? Any way to respect political boundaries while still providing necessary treatment? Yuki's expression was grim as she reviewed the latest propagation models. Admiral, the ontological infection doesn't respect political boundaries. If we allow it to reach critical mass in the resistant sectors, it will spread to treated populations through quantum consciousness network connections. Within 5 years, we could lose everything we've accomplished. Commander Webb pulled up communication logs from the ongoing Galactic Council emergency session. Admiral, they've been debating our cure protocols for 3 weeks without reaching any consensus. Counselor Verilyn is supporting full deployment, but the Hegemony Alliance and Technocracy Union are demanding that we suspend all cure operations until they can establish oversight committees and regulatory frameworks. How long would that process take? Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew. Based on historical precedent for galactic legislative action, Webb calculated approximately 15 to 20 years for full committee review and implementation protocols. Dr. Tanaka looked up from her instruments with an expression of barely controlled horror. Admiral, in 15 years, there won't be a galactic civilization left to regulate. The infection will have consumed every quantum consciousness network in known space. The bridge fell silent as the full magnitude of their situation became clear. Humanity had solved the galaxy's greatest crisis, but the cure was being prevented from deployment by the very political institutions that the crisis threatened to destroy. Elena suddenly straightened at her station, her bridged consciousness detecting urgent communication from the healed collective. Admiral, we have a new development. The former Wraith entities are reporting that the ontological infection isn't confined to our galaxy. They're detecting similar corruption patterns in 17 other galactic clusters, and the infection appears to be accelerating. Sarah felt the last of her hopes for a diplomatic solution crumble as the scope of the crisis expanded beyond anything they had previously imagined. This wasn't just a galactic emergency. It was a universal threat that required immediate action on a scale that no political system was equipped to handle. Show me the expanded threat assessment, she ordered. The main view screen shifted to display a three-dimensional map of the local universe, with corruption patterns highlighted in red. The sight was terrifying, vast networks of infected galactic clusters spreading like cosmic cancer throughout known space, with only a handful of clean regions remaining. How long before the infection reaches other galaxies in our local cluster? Sarah asked. At current propagation rates, Dr. Tanaka calculated approximately 50 years. But, Admiral, that's if the infection maintains its current rate of spread. If it reaches critical mass in our galaxy and begins exponential expansion, we could see universal infection within a single decade. Elena's eyes took on an even more otherworldly quality as her consciousness bridged deeper into the healed collective's shared awareness. Admiral, the healed entities are sharing memories from their original civilization. They faced this same decision 50 million years ago: respect political authority or take direct action to save conscious life. They chose to respect authority, and their entire civilization was consumed by the infection. The historical parallel was unmistakable and chilling. Humanity was standing at the same crossroads that had doomed the original civilization that became the Void Wraiths. They could choose political compliance and watch the universe die, or they could choose to act decisively and save consciousness at the cost of overturning established authority. Admiral, Elena continued, the healed collective is offering humanity a choice. They will respect whatever decision we make, but they want us to understand the full consequences of both options. Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew, human beings who had volunteered for what they thought was a military mission to fight the galaxy's greatest threat, only to discover that they held the fate of universal consciousness in their hands. "Elena," she said finally, "tell the healed collective that humanity accepts responsibility for this decision. We understand the risks and consequences of both action and inaction." She paused, feeling the weight of every conscious being in the universe pressing down on her shoulders. "Tell them we choose to act. Prepare for universal consciousness liberation protocols. We're going to save the galaxy whether it wants to be saved or not." The bridge erupted into activity as the crew began preparations for the most audacious operation in the history of conscious life. The forced cure of an entire galactic civilization against the will of its political institutions. What none of them could have predicted was how completely the definition of devastation would change once the cure protocols reached full deployment.